and final webinar in our Get Ready, Get Hired series. So welcome to everyone. And as Vish was saying, I do hope that you all had the opportunity to get out to the Get Ready, Get Hired job and volunteer fair. It was a great success for sure. The employers seemed quite impressed with the students. So that's always great to hear. Also, as Vish said, this is indeed the interview webinar. We'll be covering some tips on what to do before, during, and after the job interview. And we have lots to cover today. So we're just going to go ahead and jump into it. Before we do, of course, I do want to do a territorial acknowledgement. We at Kwantlen Polytechnic University respectfully acknowledge that we live, work, and study in a region that overlaps with the unceded traditional and ancestral First Nations territories of the Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tawasin, Kikite, and Coquitlam, and with the lands of the Kwantlen First Nation, which gifted its name to this university. In the cause of reconciliation, we recognize our commitment to address and reduce ongoing systemic colonialism, oppression, and racism that Indigenous peoples continue to experience. Now, you already know this information if you've been at our previous webinars, or of course, if you've used the Career Development Center in the past. But yes, this webinar is hosted by the Career Development Center, which includes career services, volunteer services, co-op education, and employer relations. And we have a whole bunch of services for you. So I'm going to just suggest that you perhaps scan the QR code there in order to find out about all the great services that we provide to students here at KPU. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We have our handles there below. Please do follow us so you can keep up to date on all the exciting events that we host at KPU. All right, as I mentioned, we do have a lot to cover today. So we're going to just dive straight into it. We have, what is the purpose of an interview? We're going to cover what to do when you get the actual invitation, before, during, preparing for those common and behavioral style questions, what to do after, including those thank you notes, and then we're going to wrap it up and have some questions. So as Vish was saying, if you do have questions, please put them into the chat. And if you can just preface them with a Q so that Vish knows it is indeed a question, that would be great. Okay, so what is the purpose of an interview? Well, it is for the employer to find out a few things about you. First of all, do you even want the job, right? Are you interested in it? Do you actually want to work there? Meaning, have you done your research? Do you know about the company? Do you have the skills? Can you do the job, right? And then what will you add to the company or the team? Now, this isn't just for them to find that out about you. This is a two-way street. So it's also for you to identify for yourself, do you want the job? Do you believe you have the skills in order to do it? And do you think you'd be a great addition to that company or that team? Now, all of these things considered, that would be the match, right? So do you want the job? Can you do the job? And what will you add to that team or to that company? So all those questions that they ask you during the actual job interview, it's really to determine one or all three of those items. Okay. So let's go with our first poll question. So our first poll question, we have that'll be coming up on the screen for you. How do you feel about job interviews? A, excitement, you love them. There's some people that really do. B, you're terrified, right? They really make you nervous. C, neutral, you're pretty calm when it comes to job interviews. Or D, you're not sure. So Vish or Tatiani, do we have that poll up for participants?
Yes, and we're seeing majority of students saying there's excitement when they have interviews. And now we have a tie, excitement, terrified, neutral.
Okay.
There's 11% or one student that says not sure. 40% yes, so majority is terrified, 45%.
Okay, well,
And
hey, you've come to the right place. I went ahead and voted too. So Yeah, I can see that. 42% are terrified. They scare you. I completely get it. I completely understand how you feel about that. So it sounds to me like you're in the right place. So let's cover some ways that we can reduce, we're always going to be nervous. That's a thing. We're not, but one thing I do want you to consider is, make sure that you use semantics, right? You're nervous, you're not scared. You're nervous about it. You're excited about it, right? Okay, so you get the invitation. Congratulations, right? They liked your resume. You get the invitation. It's okay if they haven't provided this information to you. It's okay to ask the following questions, right? Who's going to be interviewing you? Because it could be a panel, there might be more than one person that's interviewing you, but who will it be, including their names and their titles? You might get that information in an email, but if you don't, feel free to ask for it and write it down, right? This will help you later on. Logistics. So make sure you are indeed going to the right location. They might have multiple locations, so make sure you go to the right one. Is there parking? What's the process when you get there? Who should you be checking in with? And so forth. So those are important questions to ask, including, is there anything that you should prepare for this interview? Now, really, if they wanted you to prepare something for the interview, they would have told you that. But by you prompting them with that question, you might be able to uncover a little bit of intel, right? So they might say to you, well, no, there's nothing for you to prepare per se, but we will be asking a lot of behavioral style questions, or this will be the actual process. So they might provide you with some really important intel if you ask that question. Is there anything in particular that you should be preparing? All right, so before the interview, first of all, why prepare? Well, I think the poll told us why we need to prepare, right? Because we're nervous. We're in some cases we're terrified. We're really terrified about it. So preparing for the interview, I mean, really, the preparation comes before you even apply to that company, right? Because you need to do a little bit of research in order to put together a good, solid, customized resume and cover letter, which we heard about in the resume and cover letter webinar. But it certainly helps to reduce that anxiety. So it takes some of those, it's not going to alleviate it completely, but it will reduce some of those nerves that we might experience. And it will also allow us to speak and behave with confidence because we prepared, right? We maybe asked that question, is there anything in particular that I should prepare? Maybe we got a little bit of intel. So now we can take those extra steps in our preparation and we will present ourselves with much more confidence. Of course, part of the interview is for them to understand or learn how much you know about the company, right? Do you even want to work there? Your motivation. So it is important for you to understand the needs of the company so that you can target questions directly to target answers rather directly to the questions you think they might be asking. Right. And then, of course, at the end of the interview, when they offer the floor for you to ask any questions, you're going to be asking some really great, intelligent questions. Also, this is a really great reminder of how awesome you are, like how many skills you do in fact have, and how many examples of times you use those skills. So it's a really nice refresher for us to increase our own self-awareness and remind ourselves that we do in fact have great skills and we are in fact qualified for this job. Now, this image might be familiar to those of you that came to the resume and cover letter webinar, where I discussed the importance of understanding the needs of the hiring manager or the company and making that match, right? Building that connection. So during your preparation, I suggest that you put your shoes in the interviewer's your feet in the interviewer's shoes rather, right? So this will help you to understand their needs, understand their perspective, and really focus on what's particularly relevant for that position with that particular company, right? So make the match, build the match. Okay, so preparing for the interview. Now, of course, part of preparing for the interview, a large part, but it's not the only part, but a large part of preparing for the interview is to practice common and behavior style questions that you think they might ask you based on the research that you've done, based on perhaps the little piece of intel that the hiring manager or human resources person provided you when you asked if there's anything in particular you should prepare. Based on the position, the skills required to do the position, you can identify some pretty likely questions that they might ask you in the interview and then practice actually answering them. Now, you cannot, of course, predict every single question that they're going to ask you. That's impossible. But if you prepare for the bulk of the questions you think they might ask you, and you're in the interview itself and you're doing really well, you're holding your own, and then they throw a question at you that you didn't prepare, it's okay. Because at this point, you've been holding your own, you've been doing really well, and you'll probably continue to do that after the fact, right? The other thing that I would strongly suggest is when you're putting together answers to questions you think they might ask you, I might suggest you do it in bullet points. Don't write it in complete proper sentences and paragraphs because we will be so focused on articulating it the exact same way that we wrote it. And that's in fact not even how we communicate. The important thing to remember is that you want to ensure that you cover the most important pieces to that particular answer. So the fluidity and how it flows and how you wrote it, that's not the way you should even communicate it. It's very likely to be way more formal than it needs to be. So do it in point form, and this will encourage you to remember themes and overall ideas, right, when you're presenting your answers back. Practice doesn't make perfect, but it does make things better. And at KPU, you have career coaches that you can book mock interviews with. Perhaps you have trusted friends that you really appreciate their opinion, and you can always trust yourself, right? So you can practice in a mirror. You can also video yourself. Particularly, this would work really well if you're having a virtual interview. But even then, it would work quite well for you to video yourself and then or record yourself and then watch it back, and then you can kind of pick up on those little things that you'd like to change. But practicing in a mirror is a really effective way to prepare. Okay, so of course your outfit matters. Part of your research should really be to identify what that workplace is like. What are people wearing there? Is it a particularly casual place? Is it pretty formal? Right? So this will help you to choose an outfit from your wardrobe that you think works well in that environment, but that you're also comfortable wearing. So this is important. You want to make sure that you're not, continuously adjusting, your jacket or your shirt or whatever it might be. So make sure that you try it on a few days or a couple days before. Anything can happen, right? The moths might have gotten to it. You might have gotten a little larger, a little smaller, but you want to make sure that it still fits and that you're still comfortable in that outfit. Easy on the perfume and cologne. A lot of people do have sensitivities or allergies to it. You really don't want to send the interviewer out into a sneezing rage. So make sure, I would suggest avoiding it altogether. And, when you're thinking about uh, uh, shampoo, skin cream, those types of things too. You might want to just make sure that it's not strong scent. Okay, so if it's online, we're all pros now. If it's online, right? We know more or less what we need to do, but you do want to make sure that you are in a location with good lighting, that the connection is really strong, and that you either have, a alternate background or a blurred background, or if you do want to keep it, into a natural background, make sure that the background that you do have is relatively simple. No windows behind you, windows in front if you want. And for sure, you might want to do the video practice. Make sure that your head and your shoulders are in the full screen. A little bit of space above your head, but basically that your head and your shoulders are in the full screen. As I already mentioned, if it's in person, make sure that you have the correct location. And these are the little things that sometimes set us back with our time. Do you have gas in your car? Is your compass card loaded? Do you have change for the meter, or is the app on your phone, right? These are things that can absolutely put us back a few minutes and then maybe throw us off our game a little bit. So just make sure that those tiny logistical items are met. You've already done this, I hope, because with the resume and the cover letter, you research the company so that you can speak to their needs, perhaps in the cover letter, and really identify the skills that you should be highlighting in your resume. But a reminder, research the company. Why do you want to work for that particular company? Why do you want to? They're going to ask you that question, right? What makes them so special? Why are you targeting them? Be ready to talk about that because it's very likely they're going to ask you that question. Yay! So we've gotten to the day of the interview. So once you're there, right, or almost there, you want to make sure that you arrive 5 to 10 minutes early. I wouldn't go in any earlier than that. It might make them feel obligated to come out and meet you a little bit early, and they just might not be able to do that. So I would say 5 to 10 minutes is ideal. If you're running late, okay, hopefully not, but if you are, sometimes things happen that are completely out of our control. Even though we've given ourselves more than enough time, things can happen. So if you are running late, call them and explain why and ask if it's still okay to come. While you're waiting, I would suggest that you make sure your phone is completely turned either off or on mute, and avoid scrolling your phone. Maybe take the time to review the notes, or if you see pamphlets about the company or certain programs that they're offering, maybe take the time to read up on that while you're waiting for that actual meeting. When you're in the actual interview, it's a good idea, just in case they haven't had enough time to print out your resume, bring some copies for each person that's going to be interviewing you. They probably won't need them, but if they do and you have some copies, that would be great. Now, I suggest bringing 3 to 4 references. They're not likely going to want them right there at the interview. And you can certainly just make sure that they're prepared, perhaps, in your email, ready to send when they request them. But do make sure that when you're putting together your references, that you have asked those references for their permission to use them. When you go into the meeting, you can have a notepad and a pen. Ask them if it's okay. It's very likely that they're going to say yes, but this will help you to write down the odd note. I would say a word or two at a time. For example, when they ask you a question, tell us a time when you worked within a team and it was particularly successful. You can just write down the word team. This will help you to stay on topic, right? Because sometimes when we're nervous, we might tend to ramble a little bit. Another reason why it might be handy to come in with a pad and a pen is to have your questions prepared, right? So you're going to have some questions that you're going to want to ask at the end of the meeting about the position, about the team, about the company, whatever it might be. But what might happen is those questions that you had previously written down might actually get answered in the process of the interview, which could potentially leave you without any questions to ask at the end. And I would strongly suggest you always ask at least a couple of questions at the end, plus a follow-up one. Now, in that case, it might be helpful for you to have your pad and your pen handy so that you can write down a word or two to remind you of a new question you've developed based on the information that you're obtaining in this interview. Okay, during the interview, you'll find very likely that during the actual interview, you're probably not going to be nervous. maybe as much, maybe not at all. Leading up to the interview, that's typically where people are most nervous. And then they find that while they're actually interviewing, they're pretty much at ease. Okay, so if the interview is online, and it still is certainly happening online, make sure that you are maintaining eye contact as much as you can. With an online interview, it's really difficult sometimes to establish rapport, and the best way that we can establish rapport is with eye contact. And so it might be that, but that said, it might be a little bit uncomfortable for you to continuously, I'm looking right now at the camera, as opposed to looking at their faces, which will be on your screen. I encourage you to maybe take a little sticky note, put a little happy face, and put it right beside your camera to encourage you to continuously look directly into the camera when you're speaking. Now, when they ask you the question, you can of course divert your glaze and go into the or look rather at the screen, look directly at their face, because you also want to get feedback, right? Their body language, and in this case, it's really just going to be their facial expressions, will be telling you a lot. Are you speaking too long? Are they having a hard time, hearing you? Perhaps the volume is quite low. Right? All of those things are things to think and keep in mind. Also, it is kind of beneficial to having it online, because that pad and that pen will be really useful for you to, have a list of keywords that you want to make sure you insert into your answers, right? And so having that pad and pen right beside you where you can kind of make reference to it every once in a while can be quite handy. Uh, Videoing or recording yourself ahead of time will help you with the resting face, because sometimes when we have our resting face isn't necessarily the most engaging face. So this will allow you to practice while they're talking. It'll allow you to practice some facial expressions. I mean, the recording early on when you were practicing will help you do that, so that when they are speaking and you're looking directly into the camera, you have more of an engaged look, more of an interested look, not so much tired or bored, perhaps, which is what can happen when we have our resting face. So resting face is when we're not talking, but we're listening to someone who's talking. I would strongly suggest that you still dress head to toe like you would for an actual interview, right? So leave those fluffy slippers maybe for movie night, and dress head to toe as though it's an in-person meeting. Okay, speaking of in-person meetings, say it is an in-person meeting. Your body language really does matter here. So you do want to make sure that you greet them right away with a smile and a firm handshake. If they're not doing handshakes, they might be doing a elbow bump or a fist bump, whatever it might be. Right, just kind of let them guide that, but do be prepared for a firm handshake, and of course a smile. As I mentioned already, bring in that notepad to take very brief notes. You're not going to sit there writing a full story in a full paragraph, just a few prompting words that can either remind you of new questions that you might have, remind you of the question that you're being asked so that you can stay focused, but also, again, to write down their names and their positions, right? So that you can send them a thank you note a little later on. Body language. Typically, I would say use them as your guide, and you want to more or less mirror the way that they are projecting their own body language. So if they look particularly casual, you might want to sit in a way that's a little bit more on the casual side, but still, you don't want to be slouching in your chair, but you also want to look casual and comfortable. I would say, a step up from the way that they're sitting. Avoid crossed arms. You might know this already, but it does in fact close you off from the person that's meeting with you. And I am a fan of using my hands when I talk, and I do think that that does help with engagement. It helps with expression, and it does kind of portray a sense of warmth and just a genuine nature. As I mentioned before, mirror them. So if they're a little bit more on the formal side, you might want to make sure there's no slouching happening and you're also quite formal in your body language. All right, let's talk a little bit about answering those questions. So these are some pretty common interview questions. And for those of you that have had interviews, it's very likely you were asked these types of questions. The first one, which is, I would say, the most common one, and it's typically how we start out the interview, is tell me about yourself. Now, this is in fact to make you at ease, and they do genuinely want to know about you because they want to know what will you be like as a team member, right? Or as an employee. But they also want to know about you in your entirety. So it's not just you reporting back on your education and all the great courses you took and the skills that you've developed. They also want to hear a little bit about your work experience or your volunteer experience, if you have any, and anything personal about you, not too personal, but something that's personal. And it could be something that tells them or explains why you chose this particular field, why you were drawn to it. So that might include a very brief personal story. What is your greatest strength? Of course, they want to know this. Typically, they ask what is your greatest strength? So what I often see or experience when I'm doing mock interviews with students is they'll list off a whole list of strengths. And my question is, what is your greatest strength? So we really want to focus just on the one strength, unless they're asking for more. And it's always best to identify the strength and then to provide an example of when you either use the strength or how you develop that particular strength. What is your greatest weakness? That's a tough one for people, and I absolutely appreciate that one. The first thing I would suggest is to consider calling it more of a challenge, right? So you could say something like, well, I wouldn't necessarily call it a true weakness, but definitely something that's a bit of a challenge for me is this. Now, you want to make sure when you're identifying what that challenge is, that it's not something that's detrimental to the role, but at the same time, it must be relevant. So for you to be going in and having an interview for an accounting assistant position, and for you to say, I'd say my greatest challenge is snowboarding. It's not really my strength, right? That's quite random. It's funny, but it's a little bit random. And so they want to see, how self-aware are you? How truthful are you? But they also want to know, if that's a challenge for you, what are you doing in order to improve that challenge? So what have you been doing in order to work on that? So identify what the challenge is, and then let them know what it is you're doing in order to improve that. And again, if you can provide a bit of a story around that, that's great. What are your salary expectations? That's also a pretty common interview question, but when it's presented during the actual interview, this is not the time for you to negotiate. All right, so this brings us to our second poll question. Second poll question, when asked about salary expectations, it's best to A, tell them that salary doesn't matter. You love the job, you love the company, you're just interested in joining them. B, give them a range based on your research. C, say you just don't know. D, give them an exact hourly wage or an annual salary.
Okay, so far our responses are all give them a range based on your research.
Okay,
Yes, nobody playing with the money. Good.
nobody playing with the money. Okay, we'll just give it
Okay.
another couple of seconds there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so 73% are now 66 students, 68 now that they give them a range, and then 29% give them an exact hourly wage, and
Okay,
one participant says tell them that salary doesn't matter.
okay, yeah. And employers might try to trick you into that, right? And say, this job is more than the money, right? Our response is, yeah, but we live in Vancouver. Okay, good. Good. Okay, so I think we will leave it there. So that's really handy to know. Yeah, and so the majority of you chose correctly for sure. B, give them a range based on your research. So again, the question is, what are your salary expectations? Right now, I have heard in mock interviews, some people might say it's a little bit too early right now, or that can be, I'd prefer to talk about that a little bit later, maybe once there's an offer on the table. Um, but it's a question. And so if you can answer it, I strongly recommend that you do. So yes, get out there and do some research, look at job postings for similar roles, get an idea. Maybe if you've really done some good deep research previously, and maybe you've communicated directly with some employees that work at that particular company, you might be pretty well equipped to provide them with a realistic range. Now, when you're providing them with this range, remember, it's not negotiation right now. Negotiation happens after they offer you the position. That's when negotiation, and that's when you are at your strongest for negotiation. But right now, they're asking you for a question. So you do want to make sure that you give them the range that you would be interested in taking, not just the range that the market says. Okay, so if you see a range, I'm going to give you an annual salary here. If you see ranges, spanning 50,000 to 75,000, and based on your experience, based on your skills, and all that kind of stuff, and based on your own needs, right? But if you know that you're not willing to take 50, you're willing to maybe go 60, 60 to 70, let's say, because maybe, you're not as experienced to get the top of that salary. So you don't have to give them the range that you're seeing out there in the market. Give them the range that you yourself would be interested in. And you can always follow that range with this question. Was that what you had in mind for this position? Or is that the budget for this position? Because they want to know that you're on the same page. They want to know that you're self-aware, you're aware of what the wage should be for that particular position with this level of experience and education and so forth. So they want to make sure that you're on the same page. That's why they're asking that question. But you also want to make sure you're on the same page with them. You want to make sure that that is in fact what they're willing to give, right? Excellent. So this is great. Okay, so we can't do an interview webinar without talking about behavioral questions because employers love behavioral style questions, right? And the concept for a behavioral style question is that it's a pretty decent predictor of future behavior if they ask about previous behavior, right? So it's a pretty good accurate predictor of future performance based on past performance in similar types of situations, right? And employers love behavioral style questions. You are guaranteed to get these ones. But there is a method for answering behavioral style questions, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so typical behavioral style questions would be something like, have you ever had a conflict with a coworker, supervisor, or a customer? Tell me about a time you had to work under pressure. The tell me about a time is a really good indicator that that's a behavioral style question. What is your one greatest achievement, right? So you'll notice that the first one, number one, it's a close-ended question. And so you might be tempted to answer it with simply yes or no. Well, you've had 5+ years in customer service. Have you ever had a conflict with a customer? To say no to that is probably unrealistic. Now, the term conflict, to be fair, is pretty extreme. And really, what they might just be looking for is an example of when you had a disagreement with a particular, maybe a customer or a coworker or a supervisor. But it's a bit of a trick question because it's a closed-ended question, but it requires an open-ended response. It requires a story, right? Tell me about a time when. That's pretty clear. They're asking for a story. They're asking for a specific example. That's another thing that I've noticed with a lot of the mock interviews that I'm having is I'm very clear with the question, tell me about a time when, but I tend to get a response that is hypothetical and very, very generic. So well, they might say something like, I would do this if that happened, or something along those lines. It's really important in your preparation that you identify times that you use certain skills or you experience certain situations so that you can be ready for these questions, which again, they love. They love these questions. So let's dive a little bit deeper into behavioral style questions and how to actually answer them. I've written multiple articles about the STAR method and interviewing and different techniques. Please do have a look in the resource library on Career Connection. You will find a very detailed article all about STAR and how to use it and the importance of storytelling in interviews. As soon as you break into a story, I guarantee they're going to lean in, right? Their head's going to tilt. There's going to be more engagement. Everyone loves a good story, and they particularly love a good story when it gives them an idea of how you will work with them. Okay, so using the STAR method is a form of storytelling, and it ensures that you answer the behavioral style question in its entirety while adhering to a very easy to follow structure. And here it is. So here's the breakdown of STAR. If they ask you the question, tell me about a time when. Well, the first thing you want to do is build the scene, just like you would when you're writing a story. You want to build the scene, right? And pull them into your story. So you describe the situation. This might be the position that you were in and where it was that you were actually working. And the task explains, so that's the S. The T is the task. It's the particular challenge you were facing, the project that you were working on, what it was that you needed to achieve. The action is the A here, and this is probably the most important part of the STAR response because it's all you. And it's this part where you're able to demonstrate your skills and the approach that you took, because again, this will give them an idea of how you might do that in future similar situations with them. So the action piece, it's your time to shine and really demonstrate those skills. Use those keywords you wrote down on your pad and reference those in this response. Make sure you're identifying the key skills that you used in order to, alleviate the challenge or conflict, reduce the task time, decrease cost, increase customers, whatever it might be. The other thing to think about with the action piece, especially with the questions around, tell us about a time that you worked on a team and, to achieve a particular task or project. It might be tempting in the A time, in the A section of action, for you to speak about your team and use the pronoun we, but you don't want to do that. You want to stick with I. This is what I did. This is what I brought to this team. These are the skills that I used. This is, in the end, the result can be, what the team accomplished as a whole. But the A piece is all about you and how you stood out from the team. What was your task, right? Each team member had their own task and responsibilities. What did you do? The results, sometimes it's not always positive, right? But that's okay. If you have a really great example, but the results aren't particularly positive, it didn't go in the direction you wanted, please still use it. If the A piece is really strong, please still use it. I would suggest you add another R in that case, STARR, and after result, it's reflection. So you then might want to say, what you learned about the process or what you might do differently next time. So even though you have a great story, but the result isn't how you would have wanted it, it just shows that you're human. So I would suggest that you still use that particular example, but in many cases, you have some really great results. Now, I would strongly recommend that you start working on some STAR examples now. So think about a time that you accomplished something in particular that you're quite proud of. Think about a time that you collaborated on a project. Think about a time that you took a leadership role. All of these things are really fantastic star responses. And to help you along, I put together a really simple chart, or table rather, that you can do for yourself, right? So you have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 columns, or no, rows, whatever, you get the idea. And you can see that it's broken down for you, and this will give you, and have this worksheet, have it on your desktop. Keep it, as a printed out piece of paper. Keep it as a live sheet. You are continuously adding to this sheet. And you can see in the far left row, we have, the different places where you might be able to develop some really strong behavioral style responses. So through work, through education, volunteering, even in a personal situation, and then complete the chart that way. Continue to add to this. And then when you're preparing for the interview that you will have, or interviews that you will have, you can go back and refer to this, and it'll be a handy little chart that you can refer to and pull out what you need. All right, so questions for them. I do recommend that people walk into an interview with about 4 or 5 questions that they are interested in knowing answers to. As I said, though, prepare for the fact that some of them might be answered. In fact, all of them might be answered, because sometimes it's just a really great conversation and you learn a lot during that time. So be prepared to maybe jot down a word or two to remind you of a new question. But if they haven't been asked and you've prepared 4 or 5, I suggest asking up to 3, and then the 4th one being next steps, right? So an example of questions that you might ask would be around the team, the position that you're filling, like why it's vacant, the company itself, and anything along those lines. Even if you're interviewing with the person you'll be reporting to, you could ask about their management style as well. Anything goes, but make it genuine. Like, these are authentic, right? These are questions that you genuinely want answers to. Is this a newly developed position? Can you tell me about the team? What's the biggest challenge in hiring for this role? And what are the next steps? So when will there be a second interview? When should I expect to hear back from you? Really important information. Okay, whoo! So you made it through the interview, and now it's after. So when you leave, and as soon as possible after you leave, analyze what the experience was like, right? What was your overall impression of the company, of the job, of the people that were interviewing you, and of your own interviewing performance, right? What are some areas that you think you can improve on, right? If there's some questions that stumped you, write them down as soon as you can, so that this is something that you can work to improve for the next interview, because all of this is data. This is important data for you to learn and grow and put into the next interview if this one in particular is not successful. And I use this, I say not successful, but every interview is successful because we get this data that will help us to grow and improve for the next one. Okay, make sure that you indeed have the next steps, and you know when you should be following up. Thank you notes. Yes, please do send them. I would suggest you send it anywhere between 2 to 24 hours. I would not suggest, and I've been asked this question actually, I would not suggest giving it to them immediately after the interview, because you want to customize your thank you note, right? You want to, of course, thank them for their time, reiterate your interest, but you kind of want to make a specific reference from the interview. I found it particularly interesting when the new project that ABC Corporation is working on sounds so exciting, and I'd love to be a part of it, right? And then because you have that intel, make sure that you indicate that you're looking forward to next steps. They know that you know when you should be following up. So if you haven't heard from them by then, make sure that you follow up, right? If you haven't heard from them by the date that they said, follow up, send them a phone call or an email. It lets them know that you are truly interested in this position. And the actions that you take as a job seeker are proactive, right? Confidence. These are things that translate into how you would be as an employee. So think about that. Okay, a few final thoughts. You got the interview because you wowed them with your resume. So you're almost there, right? They don't want to waste their time and hire candidates they have no intention of interviewing, right? So you're almost there. So be confident, shoulders back. It's two ways here. It's not just for them to identify if they want to or can work with you, but it's also the same thing. It's for you to identify, is this in fact the position you want? Is this in fact the company that you want to work with? Do you want to work reporting directly to that person? Be yourself, because it's really hard pretending to be someone else for a long period of time. So you may as well go into it being yourself, because then you'll know if it's an authentic match. Practice. Please do make an appointment with either myself or Michelle Matyson for a mock interview. They are excellent ways to practice and prepare and get some really important feedback to help for when it's the real thing. Make sure to follow up if you haven't heard back by the date that they told you. And please do send that thank you note. Just a brief email, again, within 2 to 24 hours, reiterating your interest, thanking them for their time, pulling something out from the particular interview itself, and letting them know that you will be following up. Pause and breathe. I was asked this question, but I get asked this question quite a bit. How do I reduce the ums and that type of those types of words in the meeting? Pausing and breathing is the best way to do this. So when you get asked the question, it's okay to pause, think about it, jot down your word, right? Your word that'll help keep you on track. Collect your thoughts and then tell the story. And make sure that you're telling the story with a reasonable rate. Oftentimes when we are, or speed, if you will, like speech speed. Oftentimes when we're nervous, we speak very quickly. So take the time in your practice. This will help you to speak at a slower pace, and this will help to reduce the uncomfortable ums and so forth. Okay, let's recap it, tie it all together here. Again, interviews are to determine a match for both parties. It's not just for them to determine if they want to hire you. Make sure that you clarify any logistical questions you have, the who, where, and what to prepare, right? Prepare in order to feel more at ease, right? We're not scared, we're nervous, we're excited, right? Practice answering common and behavioral style questions based on what you know about the position, and make sure that you perhaps use the table that I suggested you use in order to help, put all of your memories, if you will, onto that sheet so that you can quickly reference and pull from it in order to help you practice for it. Use the STAR method. Using this method will help you answer the question in its entirety by first describing the situation and the task, your actions, so all those great skills that you used, the result, and maybe some reflection as well. So you can add in a second R. Send a thank you and always follow up if you haven't heard by the date. I'll give you a minute now. For those of you that don't know, at our previous webinar, the resume and cover letter, I had a QR code up, and that QR code brought you directly to our resume and cover letter toolkit. Covers everything you need to know about resumes and cover letters. The interview toolkit is the same, covers everything you need to know about before, during, and after for a job interview, and it has some great STAR examples in there as well. So please do feel free to scan the QR code here. It'll take you to Career Connection where you can download the interview toolkit. hopefully you've all stuck around because now that you have, your names will then be put into the draw. Tomorrow's draw, it was initially going to be at 3 p.m. We've changed that to 1 p.m. So if you want to follow us live on Instagram tomorrow, Friday, September 22nd at 1 p.m., we will be drawing. So we will be drawing for each of the webinars, resumes and cover letters, navigating career fairs, and today's webinar of interviews. Each person that wins will win a, I don't know how much it is, $20, $25 Starbucks gift card. Don't quote me on that. And then we'll also be drawing for attendees to the Get Ready, Get Hired fair that we had on Tuesday. So hopefully you came to that. Your name's going to be put in the draw. You could win one of 2 tuition waivers, or actually I think there's 3, 2 $250 ones and a $500 one. Also a Guildford Town Center gift card and Shocks headphones. So lots of prizes to be won. Join us tomorrow, Instagram live at 1 p.m. And now I'm going to open the floor to questions, and I'm going to stop sharing as well.
There are no questions on the little chat here, but feel free to type out your question or unmute yourself and ask questions directly.
Excellent. I was so thorough. That's what it is. I was so thorough.
I think Dan has a question.
Great. Dan, did you say?
Mm.
Dan, if you want, feel free to unmute yourself. Tatiana, I think we might need to give permission to unmute.
Yeah. Okay. So for the live tomorrow, there's a question. What is the Instagram account? It's KPU CDC we'll be using.
Yeah, please do follow us on social media.
And then for Paloma, yeah, you can get a link for this presentation on our YouTube channel. I'll write the link for you in the chat as well.
And I think, Vish, I know in the past we often would put the links to these webinars, the YouTube links on the Get Ready, Get Hired page where they would have registered for each webinar. We then replaced the register button with the link to the YouTube channel.
Perfect. I will do that.
Well, if we're not able to unmute the mics, if anyone, I see a hand up, I don't actually know who it's connected to, but if you do have a question and you can't unmute, feel free to just type it in the chat.
Yeah.
Chantel, I was just wondering, thank you very much for leading the presentation again. What is the most common mistake that people make at interviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say lack of preparation.
Okay.
Right. And yeah,
Right.
and I certainly have heard this from employers where some people will actually go to the interview and they can't answer why do you want this job because they don't know enough about it. And they also can't answer why do you want to work for this company because they don't
Right.
really know anything about the company.
Right.
So lack of preparation, I would say. And with all the resources that you have here at KPU, again, access to career coaches for mock interviews or just to have a interview conversation, the interview toolkit, tons of articles on Career Connection. I would hope that I'm sure nobody here would not prepare for their interview, right?
Right. Thank you so much for your answering my question.
Well, thank you,
Really
Dan.
appreciate it. You're welcome.
All right. Well, I think there's no more questions. Well, that brings us to the end of this webinar. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of what's very likely your lunch hour for joining us. We really do appreciate it. This is another year of Get Ready, Get Hired, a huge success. Thank you all for coming out. And hopefully we will see all of you tomorrow on Instagram Live to hear if you've won any of the prizes. Thanks, everyone.